Hello, my erstwhile film fans, film buffs. Welcome to 2019. When I go online onto YouTube, it's not about the personality necessarily, but what I look for in sort of reviews isn't just positive. I'm looking for constructive and meaningful analysis and chat about why things worked, why things didn't, perhaps how films have wrongly been championed or rightly been championed or wrongly ignored or rightly ignored. I make films myself. I'm a TV program maker. I spend most of my time developing program ideas, pitching them. It's very hard. I've had many commissioned, but sometimes you can have periods where you don't get much commissioned at all. So it's a thankless task making films. There's a famous phrase when you're on set, which is, hurry up and wait. And that's kind of a good metaphor for the whole industry. When I go onto YouTube, I'm looking for not pretentious but intelligent analysis of what makes films work. So do subscribe to our channel. There's all the family stuff, which we love doing. There's all the mental health stuff. There's the vlogs. There's the relationship podcasts. There's the munch bunch stuff where we'll all jump into a pack of American candy. All sorts of things like that. There's Vloguery, there's Vlogmas, there's the weekend vlogs, there's Green Fingered Hell. There's showbiz news, there's television program reviews, but there's also lots of film reviews. And this year we're going to have a lot more sort of, not esoteric, but those films that have a lot of effort's gone into. And if we can just do a small part of publicising films that for the people who've made them have taken years to bring to fruition, a bit like some of the projects that I work on and am working on, they take a long time to bring to fruition. And I'm going to start that this year with a documentary. So this documentary is called Free Solo. I went off to the cinema to see Free Solo, which is a National Geographic film. I used to work for National Geographic years ago, and I used to make films not entirely dissimilar to what this film was about. This was about the free climber. It's a rock climber called Alex Honnold, but he's a free solo climber, and what that means is he climbs remarkable cliff faces, mountain faces, great expanses of rock, but he climbs them without the aid of any harnesses or any ropes. Many years ago I did a film about two boulderers, and bouldering is a sort of low to the ground, unharnessed, free-form rock climbing, and it's quite balletic. It's quite sort of, it's almost choreographed. It's quite a remarkable thing to see. And we followed two guys. I think they were called Ben and Jerry because we used to wind them up about being like the ice cream. And we filmed with them in Norway, and they were setting themselves challenges. Well, that was dramatic enough, and I made that film ironically for National Geographic. But this is about one man who is probably at the very top of the realm that is free solo climbing, and it's about his mission to climb El Capitan, which is one of the biggest mountains or cliff faces in Yosemite National Park. Now, the thing about these documentaries, and the thing that always fascinates me about them, and the thing that fascinated me when we were making them, and I did a couple of series for the BBC which were about endurance and doing sort of long races to the Arctic and stuff like that. Often, it's quite a hard sell. Like if I said to my family, all right, I'm going to see a film about a man who's going to climb a mountain with no harnesses. Well, of course, initially he's a madman. And then it's dismissible. And I think it's easy to dismiss these crackpots, and they are crackpots, there's no two ways about it. Alex Honnold, the guy in this documentary, on the one hand, it's quite obviously it's an absolutely remarkable thing that he's doing, but at the same time, it's a totally insane and stupid thing that he's doing. So you can, on the one hand, have respect, but also lose respect for these characters in the same breath. But what fascinated me in the making of them, and what draws me to documentaries like this, and what I think is very compelling about this documentary is these films tell you a lot about the mental condition. They tell you a lot about what it means to be a human. I think they all flirt with, and the whole sense of adventure flirts with the idea of what it means to be alive, what it means to die, what it means for those that we leave behind. I remember years ago doing a film about people like Tony Bullimore, and Bear Grylls was one of them, who had survived major accidents in their adventuring. I did a number of interviews with their wives or partners or families, and there is a sort of slightly psychopathic gene to the people who do these things, because there has to be a sort of narrow gauge of selfish ambition which cuts out all of what's essentially the ephemera of human emotion, human relationships, and all that kind of stuff. So it's easy to dismiss as selfish, but on the other hand, I do think that these curiosities, these people who go to these extraordinary lengths, are there for a purpose. I think they offer the rest of us who wouldn't be so insane. We sort of think, well, what if I could, and what if I did, and what does this say about us as humans if we do? I'm not going to give you any spoilers. I mean, it builds towards a climb that is one of the most difficult climbs you could even conceive of. It paints the scene of all those free solo climbers that there have been who have got to sort of reach the very pinnacle, no pun intended, of their careers. None of them are alive. And I thought that was a very clever way by the filmmakers to build in the obvious jeopardy of will he fall to his death? I mean, there's no two ways about it. You're going to see this film in order to engage with the constant question of, is he going to die? Is he going to do it? Is he going to die? Like Nadia always says about actors, it's a fascinating study into the human condition. You know, what makes this man tick? Now, there are lots of clues. He lives in a van. He lives a very humble life. Some lovely little montages and scenes of him just eating, you know, poorly put together food, but with a great big ladle. You know, the ladle you would use to stir it, he just eats his food out of it. High functioning, but low functioning at the same time. It is a remarkably astonishing skill. I mean, these guys are like human Spider-Men. I mean, where I would look at a rock face, and of course, when we were filming it, we were having to negotiate, as they do in this film, all the different ways we were going to cover it with camera angles and what have you. I'd look at the cliff face, and I remember turning to the guys and going, where the hell are you going to put your hands or your feet? And they look at it, and they can see all manner of kind of grips and holds and pressure points. And there's a great moment in this film where, as we're building towards this ultimate of climbs, another climber in the sport, he uses the analogy. He says, what Alex is trying to do, it's like, imagine trying to go for the gold medal in the 100 meter sprint. But if you fail by 100th of a second, it's instant death. There is no room for failure. It's not like he ascends part of it, then harnesses on, rests, harnesses off, and then carries on. So the climb that he's going to do up El Capitan is a 3,000 foot unaided climb. And as you go along, you become more and more fascinated with him. I mean, at first, there's a sort of, what I call a sort of vacancy almost in the eyes, a sort of a manic possession of ambition, and I want to achieve this, but coupled with a sort of almost an emptiness at the back of his eyes, which is quite fascinating, which, you know, later in the film, you know, he goes in for an MRI scan, and they do a scan of his brain, and they're looking at the parts of the brain where the, you know, fear resides. And, you know, and obviously when your brain is a globulous thing that's kind of pulsing and reacting. And when presented with fear, nothing happens. That sort of emptiness, that lack of a sort of sense of the cliff edge, I mean, quite literally, it's like one of his colleagues or friends at some point, and it says, you know, the problem with Alex is he keeps taking things to the very edge, but there will come a point, and at what point will it come, where the edge is the edge? And that's where it becomes, for me, quite a philosophical film, because it's not just a film about Alex's climb, it's also a film about the filmmakers, the practicalities for the filmmakers. There are all sorts of issues with getting, I mean, I was sitting there obsessing about all these details. How have they got the sound? How are they getting a mic on him? And it's really hard to explain this, because we just assume cameras sit there and just passively observe stuff. But for the subject of these things, you know, I've made a couple of films where you can be in intense physical situations, and, you know, you need to shoot stuff on what's called a longer lens, so you can be much further away from them. The best way to film them is so that they don't feel the camera's there, because they could potentially strive too hard in order to deliver what they think you want on camera, and they could endanger themselves. And I thought this was a great film about the rights and wrongs of filming something like this, or charting something like this. You know, sometimes you can feel like, oh, the filmmakers are in it and they want a piece of the action. But I thought this was a very sort of egotistical portrait of a film crew that was genuinely soul-searching about the rights and wrongs of whether they should have been there in the first place. I don't want to give a spoiler, but there's a certain sort of, what would I say, there's a certain sort of few false starts where you think he's going to get going on the climb, and then becomes the possibility that he might just climb it whenever, and the film crew will just need to kind of be reactive. And I've been in those situations too where, you know, of course, on the one hand, you're standing there thinking, we've invested all this money, I've got all this personnel, I've got all this kit. You care for your subject matter, but at the same time, it's going to be hard going back to base. I've got to go back to Nat Geo and say, sorry guys, we're going to have to wait another year. He didn't feel like he could do it this time. So if you're interested in the dynamics and mechanics of filmmaking, but also the ethics of filmmaking, this was great. You know, there was one moment where one of the crew mentions, you know, how am I going to feel if I just see Alex fall through shot? Because am I going to be the one holding that shot? I have to, and I think it might have been Jimmy Chin, the director, said, you know, I have to be comfortable with the decision I've made, because, you know, if he doesn't survive this, we have to be as comfortable in the decision we've made as he is in going up. But then there's a third element to the sort of philosophical existential madness that's kind of kicking off around this guy. And that's, of course, the fact that he has a girlfriend. And I thought this was a really interesting documentary about love. He talks about probably never having a meaningful girlfriend or falling in love meaningfully, and yet clearly he has huge affection for his girlfriend. And what's interesting about his relationship with Sani is that, I mean, his mum, I'm jumping around a bit here, but his mum at some point in the documentary talks about the distinct possibility and likelihood that he has Asperger's. And that he's on the autistic spectrum in some way, because he didn't really understand the meaning of hugging, and he had to learn how to hug people. And you can see that there's that sort of strange awkwardness between him and his girlfriend, and yet there's real affection, don't get me wrong, there's a real fond affection from her to him. I thought she was a lovely, lovely person. But she's in a very invidious position, isn't she, where she's sort of with this guy who she met, incidentally, him signing her book at a sort of book signing, so she was a fan, so she was a groupie. He describes her at one point as cute, small, and doesn't take up much room. Very functional. But he gets an injury. And he gets an injury. And the first injury he gets, this is a sort of very interesting subplot in the film, was because she didn't belay him down properly, or the rope fell through, or it ran through her hands too fast. And so she was kind of responsible for an injury, a fracture or a sprained foot or something that he did. And then another injury happens. You know, so he asks the question, have I fallen twice because I've got a girlfriend? There will be some, and I know Nadia would be saying, well, just don't do it. Why do it? It's not necessary. And you do wonder why it's necessary. But I go back to this thing of, I have a hankering for sort of adventure. And I do think that as humans, you know, we're in a very mollycoddled, very safe, very essentially looked after, especially in the West. That, you know, hankering after these pursuits is a way of reconnecting us with the fragility of life. I mean, he does talk at times about the fact that he couldn't be more closely attuned to the hum of what it means to live, because he is so frequently taking himself to the edge of death. But as he himself interestingly says, he says, I'm doing everything I can not to die. I'm not thinking about dying. And isn't that interesting? He's never thinking about dying. Now, is that why he hasn't died? As he rightly says, we're all gonna die. And there's a really interesting moment where he talks about, if I was hit by a car, you know, all my friends and everyone would be a bit sad, of course, but they'd get over it. He said they'd explain it. They'd go, he was hit by a car. Why is it any different? And at first I was thinking, well, of course it's ridiculous. It's different, it's ridiculous. And then I thought, well, no, we are all gonna die. And if you've got some control over how that's going to happen, and if you're not going about it, though it looks dangerous to everyone else, if you're not going about it with a view to die, but with a view to live and accomplish something, what is the difference? So you can see, I just found all of these kind of swirling thoughts and questions really, really, really compelling. I mean, when he's climbing, and I remember filming this with the boys in Norway, you're talking about millimeter moves. I mean, there's some great close-up shots of his feet and his hands, and, you know, the talc dust on his hands and the hand marks. And there's an interesting moment where, as I said before, he decides not to do the ascent one day. And there's a lovely line from the director, Jimmy Chin, who I think is the co-director. He says, it's kind of reassuring that even Spock has nerves. You know, it's an interesting film about what it means to be human. It's an interesting film about what it means to live. He interestingly makes an observation, Alex, the climber, of saying he feels that nobody achieves anything great when they're happy and cozy. And I kind of know what he means by that. I think, you know, unless you put yourself on the edge and put yourself at risk, unless you're willing to step over things, you know, a line we often use with the girls is, bravery is about seeing the thing that's causing the fear stepping out and overcoming it. There's a lovely moment towards the end of the film where he moves just through the kind of wildlife, the scrubland at the bottom of El Capitan. And there are these cutaways of the deer. And what I loved about those, it's quite a poetic moment, I thought, where the deer are looking at him as impassively as he, in a sense, is looking at El Capitan, because on the one hand, he wants to get to the top of this, but his sense of accomplishment or not with it, when he's accomplished it in the past on other climbs, it's so matter of fact. There's a sort of ordinariness to it all. He's just another part of nature. They're a part of nature. You may see them dead and broken in a stream further down the way in another 6 months. They may see him fall to his death. And then you've got this other element, and it was a much more compelling element in a way, of the filmmakers. And I thought it was a lovely moment as we witnessed this climb, and the highs and the lows and the horrors and the fears, and I'm not going to give away what happens. And there are some lovely moments where a couple of the cinematographers and cameramen, some can watch, some can't. It's one of those films that on the tin you'd go, oh, it's another Nat Geo film about another nut job climbing another big thing or doing something nutty. But actually, I would fully recommend you watching this documentary if you want to toy with some of those questions of what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to just be a physical thing? What are we capable of? What haven't we done that we could have done if we perhaps didn't feel fear? You know, there's some very touching moments between him and his girlfriend, Sani, where, you know, she's saying essentially, you're okay, you're going to head off in the night and climb this thing, but I have to say goodbye to you as if I'm saying goodbye to you. And he's saying, well, don't say that, because I'm not looking at this as a view to failure. Now, she had a huge pressure on her. She had to kind of make out like, yeah, this is going to be fine. And I think only about 3-4 weeks before his final climb, another climber, who he thought was invincible himself, Alex did, died. And it was interesting because Alex kind of not shrugged off that death, but he just said, well, he had a bad day. So there's a sort of cursoriness to life. You could say there's a sort of not valuing it, but at the same time, I think in one sense, he's not valuing the physicality and the social reality of what it means to be a human being, maybe. But on another, he's really valuing life because he's sort of taking the life experience to the most heightened place. And I just want to say a huge shout out to the filmmakers. I thought it was wonderful. I thought they dealt with themselves in it. It's very difficult making yourselves part of a film without it looking a bit eggy. And I thought it was a critical component, and it was a very philosophical component. It really made me think a lot about what it means to be a witness on these things. Because they, you know, to all intents and purposes, they didn't know going into this whether they're going to be the witness to a death. And in the process, filming it, and in the process having to think, and this is the terrible thing, having to think aesthetically. Because there are some glorious shots in this, but you're shooting glorious shots at the same time thinking he could perish in the middle of this shot. Bit of a mindfuck, that. Free Solo, check it out. It will make you think about far more than the madness of climbing a 3,000-foot rock face without any support.